Hello and welcome to Accenture's International Women's Day celebration. A warm welcome to everyone who has joined us here today to celebrate, be inspired and hopefully take some renewed action on the importance of International Women's Day. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are, at home, at work, on site with clients, or maybe even on the move. My name is Georgie Gardner. I'm a journalist and news presenter for the Nine Network, as well as a podcaster, a mother, a proud feminist, and I am delighted to be part of your International Women's Day celebrations. I'm joined today by Matt Coates in the official hosting duties. Good morning to you, Matt.
Good morning, Georgie, and welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to everybody that's joined us today. I'm Matt Coates and I lead Cloud First for Accenture here in ANZ. And I'm also the executive sponsor of our Gender Employee Resource Group. This year marks Accenture's 18th annual International Women's Day celebration. It's a great opportunity to engage in open and meaningful conversations to further advance our commitment to equality. Our theme this year is Make Change Happen. So today we're going to be focusing on the actions each of us can take to help accelerate gender equality. And over the next 90 minutes, we'll talk to an incredible lineup of speakers, some who have experienced firsthand the change we've witnessed in the past few decades, and others who are active participants in continuing to build on that momentum. Through today's event, we hope that you gain greater insight into our commitment to accelerating equality, not only within Accenture, but out in the community in which we all live.
Thank you, Matt. Well, before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting today. We are coming to you from Barangaroo in Sydney, which is Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. So in the spirit of recognition, we pay our respects to Barangaroo and all Aboriginal elders, men and women, past, present and emerging, and to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. And for our people in New Zealand, kia ora. Let's start with a little bit of housekeeping. We would love you to share your experience with your networks and tag Accenture Australia and New Zealand. And you can do that by using the hashtags IWD2022 and hashtag Equality Week. Now, if you are experiencing any technical issues with the virtual show floor platform, you will find a question mark at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and that will take you to the event help guide where you can submit a request and hopefully someone will call you back, Matt.
Thanks, Georgie. Before we kick off, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the escalating impact of the events happening right now in our broader community. Queensland and parts of New South Wales are experiencing floods and heavy rainfall with significant impacts. Globally, the current situation in Ukraine can be unsettling, particularly for those of you who have family and friends located there. For everyone impacted, it has been an extremely difficult and unsettling period. At this time of immense challenge and suffering, I urge all of us to care about each other, to respect each other, and to consider how your colleagues and those around you may be feeling or be affected. I know that Accenture is strong because of the strength that each of you bring and the core values that we live by every day. I also want to recognise those of you who have donated time and funds to these crises as they continue to unfold. Thank you for coming together to support the people most in need.
Yeah, well said, Matt. Really challenging times, that's for sure. On International Women's Day, it's important to shine a light on the areas where inequalities still exist for women and focus on what we can do to fix it. The latest gender pay gap report from Australia's Workplace Gender Equality Agency found that women typically earn about $25,000 less than men every year. And in New Zealand, the gender pay gap has remained stagnant at 18.5% in the wake of the pandemic. That's according to analysis by Strategic Pay. Women also take on more of life's mental load or emotional unpaid labour. Research by the Australian Human Rights Commission found women spend twice as many hours each day than men doing unpaid care work, such as raising children or offering support for an elderly parent or unwell loved one. Female representation in Australia's federal parliament is roughly a third of men, and in the last decade, Australia has slipped down in the global rankings and now sits in 50th position. It's worth noting that if we ranked the coalition in isolation, that ranking would be 120th, with Saudi Arabia one place in front. As well as in government, women are consistently underrepresented at the most senior levels of business. The 2021 Chief Executive Women's Senior Executive Census found that only 18 of Australia's top ASX 300 companies have female CEOs. That equates to just 6%. Not only that, but 86% of roles with a direct pathway to the top job are held by men. This despite the evidence showing that diverse leadership teams and in turn diverse companies perform better. The report also predicted it'll take another 65 years for women to make up 40% of roles in executive leadership teams. In New Zealand, just 19% of large organisations have a female CEO. The findings of the 2021 Pay Equity booklet show New Zealand still has a long way to go in addressing the barriers to pay equity and representation of women in senior positions. A lot of work still to go.
So much work to do. The stark reality of those findings should be a wake-up call for each of us, and they align with some of our own research. We recently took a closer look at our Better to Belong research with a focus on gender equality in the workplace. Over the past 2 years, we have continued to see that the population affected most by the pandemic is women. Women are dealing with skyrocketing unemployment, reduced access to good healthcare, increased responsibilities at home, and decreased financial independence. Women are among the groups of people, including LGBTIQ+ and racial and ethnic minorities, that have the longest runway to an equitable work experience. The threat of a setback in gender equality needs to be stopped in its tracks and be put back on a path of forward momentum. Our research shows that when women feel supported during the moments that matter, whether it's joining a new firm, how they're rewarded, transferring within an organisation, life events, they feel more trust in their leadership, higher job satisfaction, and believe their company is a great place to work. That's not surprising though, right? When companies take steps to create an equitable environment for their employees, they can increase human potential by up to 5 times. That means more opportunities for learning, career and personal growth, financial security, and so much more. If we as employers can't realise the potential of employees at work, we risk losing the top talent.
It's just common sense, really, isn't it? Well, in addition to the financial inequity the pandemic brought to the surface, women suffered more on the home front, juggling homeschooling with work commitments. But there was also a marked increase in domestic violence, thus reversing some hard-won gains of the previous decades. In fact, I heard Tanya Plibersek say yesterday that the only rising crime rate in Australia is violence against women. It's not good. But at the same time, it has also reinforced the critical role that women have played, most notably in the capacity as nurses, teachers, aged care workers, and in the preschool sector. The pandemic has brought all of that to the surface. We've relied on women in these areas like never before. And as we start to move on from the pandemic, and with that fresh in the community's mind, we are presented with an opportunity to push equality and hold our ground. And I'm very heartened to learn that Accenture is one such organisation intent on driving gender equality in a way in which women and the organisation, as you said, can absolutely thrive.
Yeah, I'm certainly proud of what we're doing here at Accenture. But as we've said, there's a lot more to do. But what we can do is create an environment for women to thrive. And to do that, we need to focus on getting the day-to-day experiences right. Research shows that experiences that women are having in the workplace are preventing them from thriving. Just over half of women report having a senior leader that is actively helping them grow, compared to 62% of people overall. And despite the fact that 70% of women aspire to be in senior leadership, they are significantly less likely to be satisfied with the pace of advancement. And women are also less likely to agree that they will be able to advance at the pace that they want. So we need to be intentional about matching employees, particularly women, with leaders that can actively help them grow. We need to empower women to make decisions that work for their unique situations and provide skilling and advancement opportunities that support women's career goals. The Accenture Future of Work study in 2021 revealed that the future of work may look different for women. Women were more likely to want to work remotely, but were also more likely to have to be on site during the pandemic, revealing a complete disconnect between what women feel is optimal and their experience in the workplace. Women reported preferring remote work as they feel they can maintain productivity, work in a safer environment, and enjoy the flexibility. So in the future, we need to utilise tech-enabled platforms to build community and inclusive environments that protect the physiological safety and boost trust and empathy.
So what you're basically saying is that for women to thrive, that's got to be the top of your CEO's agenda.
Absolutely. It needs to be if we're going to make the change.
Yeah.
And at Accenture, our ambition is to be, the most inclusive and diverse company in the world. And we've got our targets and our goals are anchored around that. By 2025, we've committed to getting to 50-50% gender equality. And whilst there's always more to do, I'm so proud of our firm's continued focus on inclusion and diversity and the progress we're making. We believe the future workforce is an equal one and that gender equality is an essential element. We know that to achieve equality, we need an empowering environment, one that trusts employees, respects individuals, and offers the freedom to be creative and to train and work flexibly. Our first guests, Accenture's HR lead, Sara Kruger, and CEO Pete Burns will dive into this in a bit more detail and share what we are doing here in ANZ to rise to this challenge. Before I hand over to them, we'd like to share a video created by the Monkeys, which is part of Accenture last year, as a part of the powerful campaign for UN Women that highlights some of the challenges that we're still facing when it comes to gender equality.
Here in Australia, we're pretty easygoing. We don't like to get caught up in things. If something goes wrong, we just say, she'll be right. If we lose a ball over the back fence, she'll be right. The car's parked it in the middle of the bush, she'll be right. She's still being paid 87 cents to the dollar, she'll be right. She can't walk home alone at night for fear of being raped, she'll be right. You see, for a country that's ranked 44th on the Global Gender Gap Index, she's just not that big of a priority. I mean, she's only boss 18% of the time. She'll be right. She has a 1 in 3 chance of being assaulted. She'll be right. She could even be the one woman a week killed by a man she knew and trusted. But yeah, she'll be right. When will she be right? Dunno. You see, Aussies don't usually talk about when. She will be. Eventually. Right?
Hi everyone, my name is Sara Kruger and I'm the CHRO here for Accenture Australia and New Zealand, and today I'm talking to Peter Burns, our CEO. Hi Pete.
Hi Sara, how are you?
Good, thank you. So I think that was a pretty interesting video to say the least, and I think really quite sad in a lot of respects in that we're still there in so many different spaces, and that the issues that are impacting all women, whether that be in the workplace or at home, are still very real for a very large portion of our population. And so I might lead on from that video, Pete, and ask you a question around some of the things that are touched on there, specifically the pay equity, the 86 cents, and the gender-based harassment, to ask what's Accenture doing in that space?
Yeah, sure. And just let me say in the opening, I've seen that video now a few times, and in fact was at the UN celebration last week, where that video was also played, and I think you could hear a pin drop. And I think every time I see it, the rawness and the starkness of the facts presented in that video, and to the facts that both Georgie and Matt laid out, I think is a real call to action. And so, while we shouldn't need days like this to remind us, I do think this is a wonderful moment for us to very starkly stare into what we're all collectively doing in this. And like Matt, I'm very proud of where Accenture is on its journey. That by no means says that we're there. But if I start with gender equality, if I start with pay equality, that's something we take very seriously. And that's not just about making sure that for like roles, like tenures, like skills, like locations, we have pay equality, but also that we are expunging any biases. And I think with this year's thematic around Break the Biases, things that we do in small ways, but I think in very meaningful ways, like having dedicated roles within any of the promotion cycles, with any of the appraisal forums of folks that are specifically there to try and call, see, catch any form of bias that may unconsciously emerge is one real demonstration of the effort that we really put in to hold that true.
The equality champions.
Yeah, equality champions. And then I think secondly, we're a technology company, and we're using analytics, we're using our own tool sets to make sure that we're working through the data that we have to try and emerge any biases that may appear to the system to sort of help focus leadership. And so trying to turn back our own capabilities into it. In terms of the questions around harassment and creating safe workplaces, to me, I'm really proud of our inclusion and diversity programs at large. I think that's all about creating safe places where everybody feels like they belong. And for me, being able to sign up to those sorts of commitments and be very open in terms of allowing people to feel that we have a culture to call out anything. But frankly, at the end of the day, we have zero tolerance and will not tolerate any form of harassment or any form of bias towards any form of diversity that we cherish so much in this firm.
And I know that you've personally signed up to our statement of commitment on those
Correct.
fronts as well, which
That's right.
which I think is great. Matt did talk in his session about the ways that organisations can improve what they're doing, and specifically about things like the moments that matter and what it is that we're doing around areas like flexible work. I think Georgie and Matt touched on the fact that women do a lot of the caring when it comes to inside and outside home. So what are some of the things that we're doing within Accenture to help flexible working across the board?
Look, I think, if there is ever a small silver lining in COVID, I think it has helped us advance the notion that every role flexes. It helps make people very aware and adaptable in those moments of matter. And I think we've proven to ourselves time and time again that we can deliver great outcomes for our clients and for each other in those sort of environments. But equally, I think we're investing very heavily, as you know, in some of the progressive policy frameworks where we are looking specifically at some of those moments that matter and making sure that we enshrine those in our policies, in our leave frameworks, so that folks that need to attend to caring duties, even around affirmation surgeries and the like, that we have progressive policies in place. And we've just rolled out quite a number of those that again enshrine in our policies a raft of things that relate to those moments of matter, that really affirm to everybody in Accenture that these are things that are important to us. I think the other thing that we've been doing for some time, and I think it is an area of reflection more broadly, is we continue to pay superannuation on our parental leave programs. One of the things that I think we're all conscious of is that as particularly women move in and out of the workforce naturally through their career, we can manage the pay equality, but we don't want to have disadvantage creeping in around wealth creation through time. That leads to financial stability and leads to financial independence. So that's something that we've been quite progressive on for some time, and I think they're the sort of areas that we will continue to look at and work with.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, some of the policies that we announced around gender affirmation, around carers leave, around IVF leave and a few things like that, I think are really positive. Aboriginal, Indigenous leave. Yes. I think the other thing is you touched on right at the beginning that we're an organisation that's built on a lot of data and a lot of information. Yes. And I know that you're a data guy as well, and you like to look at the data and things like that. We have the targets that Matt talked about. What are some of the things that we're doing from a sort of an accountability and a transparency perspective around our goals and around that information that we know is there, and maybe the reporting on that information?
That's right. Look, I think targets are important. I think it's a big part of our corporate culture that we want to put statements out there, and we want to make sure that we are on trajectory against those statements. And so our progression towards gender equality in the workforce, the quotient of leadership, which is in Accenture's terms our managing directors being above 30%, we're well on the way to achieving that by 2025, and I think we will then stretch ourselves even further. But I think in terms of reporting, it isn't just about hitting the numbers, because the targets, I think, are a very clear and affirmative statement, but what really matters is that we're creating the environments, the experience for our workforce that matters. And so I think what we are reporting on and the things that we're putting energy into is beyond those targets, are we getting the outcomes in terms of workforce experience through our surveys and the forums that enable people to be able to speak up and really attest to the fact that we're on a journey there.
With regards to COVID-19, Georgie touched on that a fair bit, and you've already touched on some of the things that we're doing. What are some of the other things that we might be able to do to remove some of the barriers around equality in that space?
Yeah, and look, I actually get quite excited by this, because I do think when you look at some of the stark statistics that have emerged, which are not impressive as a fallout of COVID-19, there is still an underlying need for us to continue to encourage women into STEM type employment. I think there is a real and present opportunity to harness that fantastic skill set, that workforce that's out there, where women have potentially come out of the workforce for whatever reason, for caring responsibilities, but how do we now help those individuals access and re-engage with the workforce? And so we're investing very heavily with academia. We're building bespoke programs, training courses that enable and encourage access into those sorts of skills, and then making sure that on entry that we have the structures around the type of work, so the flexibility in the nature of the work, the ability to tap on, tap off. And I think with the growing relevance of the independent workforce in our economy, frankly, that's something that we have to solve for ourselves, but I think it's going to be critically important for the nation. Yeah,
I would completely agree. So I think thank you very much for your time today, Pete. I think there's a lot of great information out there. As Matt alluded to, there's a lot more that we need to do. And I think maybe one piece of homework I might leave you with, and it'd be good to hear people sharing this on the socials afterwards as well, is what are you personally going to do over the next 12 months outside of your role to actually make this real? And I'll do the same. I've got a few little ideas. So next up, we've got to hear from some of our colleagues across the organisation on their perspectives and what they're going to do to accelerate change. So Pete and I will build on that through the socials and share that later. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks.
Gender equality is extremely important to me because it came through in my upbringings. I have 3 brothers, and both my parents, mum and dad, brought me up as an equal in the family unit. Then when I stepped out into the business world, I didn't see that reflected in that environment.
One of my first jobs was in advertising, and you can imagine what that was like 25 years ago. It was really the Wild West. There was a lot of sexism happening in that space at the time. Unfortunately, a lot of my female friends who are still in advertising report that things haven't got much better.
As an Indian woman growing up in India, I had to challenge the stereotypes from a very young age.
I was raised in quite a traditional culture, and there is quite a set definition about what it means to be a woman. But then in my process of discovering myself, I found that I could be the best version of myself when I could throw that definition out of the window and really just be who Michelle is.
I remember my mum telling me stories of times where she's really struggled at work, where she hasn't been treated with the same level of respect, where males have talked over her.
And when my wife was pregnant with our first child, she asked me a question that really for me came out of the blue and something I hadn't ever considered before, which was, why should I be the one who stays home with the children?
That old sort of adage of, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I didn't want that to be the case for anyone else. And, it became really important for me to find ways to be the example, because if we can't be inclusive, we can't drive that change.
I think a lot's changed in the world, but still the world is not equal. And I really do think it's important that we strive for equality, that as we strive for equality across many different sectors, but gender being a really important one, we will have a better world.
Next up, we've got Accenture's Nhung Mason with guest speaker Jane Hemstritch. Jane is an Accenture alumni and independent non-executive director who will share some insights into the changes in gender equality that she's experienced through the years.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Nhung Mason here. I'm the client group lead for products, proud mum of 3 kids and 1 naughty dog. I'm so thrilled today to have Jane Hemstritch with us. Jane, welcome.
Thank you.
You have had an amazing career spanning over 40 years. Share a little bit about it.
Well, my career started in the mid-70s in London at a mid-tier accounting firm, and didn't end, but an important point of it was when I left Accenture in 2007, I was in charge of all of Accenture's business in Asia Pacific. So it was quite a ride from London to Melbourne and all the way through. And on the way, things changed for women in the workforce. When I started, I was, I think, one of 2 women out of the whole cohort of people in my office in London. I remember being taken to a client and the client saying to my manager, well, take her away, she can't possibly be competent. And my manager said, why not? And the client said, well, she's a woman. And I have to say, my manager was magnificent. He stood up, put his fists on the client's desk and said, she's one of the best people I've ever worked with and she's staying. But then, of course, I had to deal day to day with the entrenched attitude. But he was gracious enough at the end to admit that I did actually know what I was doing. And that sort of thing happened fairly repeatedly through my early career. I was often the only woman or the first woman. I was the only woman manager when I joined Anderson Consulting in Melbourne. I was the first woman partner for Anderson Consulting Accenture in Australia. And I thought naively that as more women were recruited as graduates, that level of recruitment would be reflected through the various career stages. And I was very disappointed when that didn't happen. But I think one of the reasons for that was what was being talked about earlier, the family responsibilities that so many women still felt they had to deliver on, was perceived, whether that was real or not, to interfere with their ability to put in the work that was necessary to grow up the levels.
And being the first woman in so many of those situations, I'm sure you faced many challenges. Myself, I'm really proud of the fact that I'm the first Vietnamese-born woman to be in a CG role in Accenture. But you obviously had the opportunity to have so many senior roles as a first woman. So what were the type of challenges you faced?
I think one of the challenges was that very much the firm in those days operated in a very male way. So you had to learn how men tackled problems, how they thought about things, and be ready to behave that way yourself. I couldn't really be authentically female, if you understand what I mean, because everyone around me wasn't. And if I was going to make any kind of argument, it had to be according to the rules that applied, and they were very male rules. And so that's what I learned to do. And then, of course, you'd get the not unfair criticism from younger women that you were just a bloke in a skirt, which I found quite hard at times because, you know, you were trying to make headway in the circumstances in which we found ourselves.
So hopefully we've progressed a bit more since then. We've still got a long way to go. But in today's age now, what advice would you give to others?
I think what I'd say to women now is be clear about your goals and work towards them. And don't let small disappointments on the way derail you. Stay optimistic and stay confident. You are as good as you think you are. And just because women tend, on the whole, to be a little more self-effacing doesn't mean to say that you're not really capable. And if you retain confidence in yourself and keep your eye on the long goal, I think you can do really well.
You're also the chair of the Accenture Foundation. Share a little bit with us about what the foundation is doing to accelerate gender equality.
Well, one of the things the foundation's been doing is working with a wonderful organisation called Good Return, which is helping women in poverty in Cambodia learn to manage their money much better and run their small businesses much better. And the belief behind that is that if you can lift women out of poverty and educate them, it's really good for the country as a whole. And there's a lot of research that backs that up. So we've been proud to work with Good Return on that initiative. And the other thing we're doing at the moment is working with the Alana and Madeline Foundation on, and this is something that I think one of our speakers will get to, on digital inclusion and also digital literacy and being safe in the digital world, which I think is so critically important for girls and young women because there's so much that happens in the digital world that can be unsafe for women as well as in the physical world.
So Sarah just gave us a little bit of homework in terms of what we're doing personally to accelerate gender equality. Know that you're on the board of a number of organisations, one of those being Lendlease. Could you share with us what you're personally doing and what impact you think it's having?
At Lendlease, we have a committee of the board called the People and Culture Committee. And one of the things that it does, and this gets back to Pete's point about data, is asks for reporting on gender equality and what plans the organisation has in place to address it and how we're going against those plans. And one of the things that I found most impressive over my tenure on the Lendlease board has been its repeated effort to eliminate the gender pay gap. Every year we get detailed reporting, level by level, position by position, as to where women stack up against the men. And every year they spend actual real money to address that gap and make sure that it's ironed out, and also to address the root causes of that so that women are absolutely position for position, job type by job type, paid the same as men.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for all that you're doing to accelerate the gender equality agenda. Back to you, Matt.
Thank you so much, Nhung. I'm very excited to introduce our next guest, Sara Saleh, who'll be speaking to Louise May, our strategy and consulting lead. Sara is making a huge impact in our community, using the power of storytelling through poetry to make a difference. Over to you, Sara.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay my utmost respect to elders past and present, and extend that to all First Nations watching wherever you are today. I am so grateful to be here sharing my stories with you on this land that is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Australia. Australia, I love you, but you need to stop. You need to stop pressuring me. Stop pigeonholing me. Stop labeling me. I am not your moderate or liberal or conservative or fundamentalist or extremist or radical. Stop orientalizing me. Inadvertently legitimizing stereotypes. Stop putting the onus on me to plead not guilty. Stop otherizing me, exotifying me, eroticizing me. I am not a Halloween costume. I am not here for your entertainment, for you to find me beautiful or desirable, for me to make you feel comfortable. Stop defining me. Stop speaking at me, about me, for me. It is not up to me to prove my humanity, so stop trying to translate me. Stop bleaching my skin and burning my hair into your version of perfection, submission. Stop mispronouncing my name, Sara, Saleh, telling me to behave. Stop calling me angry, dismissing my anger as if I don't have a right to be. Stop projecting your insecurities onto desperate people seeking survival, as if they are a threat to your way of life. And do not reverse anything me. Stop telling me that you don't see color as though I am invisible. Stop calling for whiteness studies or man studies at already whitewashed universities. Stop giving out grants for people to fix me as though I am a problem. See, we arrived here unwelcome. We continue to take and take and take over, to gentrify and colonize today. Stop letting woolies take over our holidays. Stop dispossessing me, hyphenating me, erasing my memories, unwriting history. Stop soaking our cultures in violence, and stop warring with me from the bedroom to the battlefield. Stop objectifying me, stop undressing me, glass housing me, gender pay gapping me. See, I don't want a seat at the table. I want to break the damn table. Stop color shaming, body shaming, ability shaming, age shaming. No. You cannot find your masculinity or your freedom in between these sheets. No, you will not find revolution as you feed from our flesh. So stand with me. Do not reduce the whole entire universe into a single story. So with our fists and our voices raised high, let's fight together for your rights and mine.
Well, thank you so much, Sara, for sharing that with us. Truly beautiful, and I think a lot in that most people can relate to and hear words and thoughts and ideas that they've seen, experienced or observed. So beautiful poem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, poetry is such a fantastic way to leverage the power of storytelling. Can we start by understanding a little bit about your story and
Yes.
what makes you you and how you came to this place?
Absolutely. So I was very lucky to be able to grow up in a household where art and storytelling was such a big feature. I think it's because my parents as migrants sort of arrived to this country with very little to offer us. So as a way to connect with our heritage, we were always surrounded by art and music and film. And so for me, I think that's sort of the thing that I call my inheritance. But then on the other hand, seeing that, and then also as a visible Muslim, as an Arab woman, you often find that we are depicted in quite problematic, negative ways, and whether it's in pop culture or mainstream media. And so that for me was really quite jarring. And I have spent a considerable amount of time trying to fight those stereotypes and fight, the Islamophobia and the racism. But ultimately, I think to myself, we also have so much to celebrate, so much joy, and I want to focus on creating and writing. And so for me, I want to keep doing that because I would like for future me's to be able to see themselves on bookshelves, in libraries, and in, movies and film.
Fantastic. And you are very active in the community. It's a big part of what you do. Storytelling is a way to enrich our societies. Obviously a big part of why you do what you do, but let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, I always say that poetry isn't exactly, poem and writing and arts even broadly. They're not going to give us the rights that we deserve, and they're not going to stop injustice in any sense, end poverty or end detention centers. That's something I'm passionate about. But what art does is that it enables us specifically to be able to think and feel differently. It affects our language, and that language affects how we think about things and how we take action. And so for me, if you transform people, that's how you transform societies. And I think that's really what for me, the power of poetry is ultimately.
Yes, taking us to other places. We actually chatted about our love of travel, and obviously travel is another way to do that. Let's talk about the concept of intersectionality, and you do raise that in the poem that you just shared with us. As a woman and someone from a multicultural background, can you share some examples of the stereotyping and the biases that you were in that poem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole range, as I said, as a visible Muslim and Arab woman that I have faced, whether it is from the sort of day-to-day, just getting name called and abused in the street to even being spat on at one point, unfortunately. So it does get a bit hairy, and to even just more broadly, that kind of structural or systemic violence that we face. So what that means is when you have politicians or media personalities who you trust to be credible, to say the right thing, end up saying things like we should ban Muslims and labeling us all in this kind of homogenous, negative sort of stereotyping way. So for me, I think that's something that has really negatively impacted my sense of identity and my belonging.
Which is, it's sad in its own right, isn't it? But great to share that. Now, turning to the positive, right? Because I think one of the beautiful things about your poetry in general is that you do talk about trauma and pain, but also you talk about beauty and love and, things that we can do. We're asking all of our speakers to share actions that they're taking and can take to accelerate gender equality. For me, as a mother, I think about that a lot. In my household, the first step for me is gender equality in the household, and also working with my son and daughter to become beautiful human beings in an equal world. What actions are you taking and what would you share with folks?
Well, let me just say that they're very lucky to have you as a mother and as a role model. In our brief chat, I really felt that. I think for me, it is really important that we think about who is left behind or out of these types of conversations. I feel very privileged to be able to be in a space where I share my stories and, won awards and so on, but actually who isn't winning awards, who isn't at the front line in the forefront of this, but still doing that invisible work, whether it is domestic work, care work, even garment factory workers. So for me, my simple kind of action and challenge to myself is to really think about what I consume and what is the process in that and how to make it as ethical and sustainable as possible. And we're very lucky to have that information easily available to us, so that shouldn't be very difficult. But ultimately, I would love for us to be able to create a world where we could bring all the parts of ourselves and feel safe and comfortable and respected to do so.
Well, thank you. Absolutely lovely. And thank you so much for sharing your poem with us. So the other thing I'm going to be doing is buying a copy of your soon-to-be released book. So I'd encourage folks to have a look for that.
Thank you very much.
And look at your performances online, which are really inspiring.
I think things will change, but I think things need to change a lot faster than they have been.
I think all females should be looking for ways to pull others up with them and to acknowledge their peers and celebrate their peers when they have great successes and to provide that platform for them as well.
I would encourage others to learn as much as possible. As with anything, and certainly I've experienced this over the last 7 years, education equals awareness.
I think one of the most important things about equality is to check your own biases and to be conscious that you have them. Read widely, listen to podcasts, and then I would say look out for inequality in everyday life, everyday meetings, everyday actions, and speak up.
I'm constantly bringing examples of perhaps, covert sexism that you see in the media or elsewhere to my son's attention. I think it's really important to have these discussions with young people, particularly young men.
So what I do is, if I'm in a meeting, I do not let any men interrupt me or any of the women in that meeting. I mentor the junior women to be more capable to present and be more confident. I prepare them before they go to meetings so they can speak up.
So one thing I can do as a male is ensure that whenever I see bad behaviour from any of my male colleagues or my female colleagues, I stand up for what's right, being standing up for gender equality, ensuring that everyone's voice is heard and everyone is respected.
Calling it out when there is some bias in the way that people speak, or whether when we have a newsletter and there is just only women or only men on the page, calling it out that it should be more diverse and inclusive.
As a leader, I take full responsibility to ensure we've got a balanced pipeline of talent.
I'm definitely proud to be part of the Gender Network and to be part of driving gender equality at Accenture. That's one of my favorite things about being at this company, is seeing the change actually be actioned and for leadership to really take an active role in making sure those initiatives come to life.
Together, we can make change happen. Make a commitment to accelerate equality.
On that note, I want to finish by saying thank you to everybody who helped make today's events possible. On behalf of Georgie and myself and the leadership team here at Accenture, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our incredible speakers, and a big thank you to each of you for joining us today. And thank you to you as well, Georgie.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Matt. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm excited for the future, folks, and I'm confident that we can make change happen. Thank you so much, and happy International Women's Day.